you guys ever have a little too much time on your hands, I would highly encourage go on YouTube, and you can still find plenty of these episodes for you to watch. Many of them are posted. As you can see, the filming technology industry has really come a long way since the 80s and 90s, but it's still really entertaining. And again, the interesting thing about the show was that they did play all of the full audio from actual 911 calls, and afterwards they would kind of do interviews with the actual dispatchers, and again, like they said, if they could, they would, give you live interviews with the patients or the people who called. So again, really interesting concept for a show, and it did really kind of spur the nation's fascination with, emergency systems and emergency services. And, to this day, there are so many 911 shows on TV now, some of them being live footage, live, or they're not reenacting anything at all, in real life systems, or some of them being, soap operas on NBC. So again, the fascination still hasn't died. This is just kind of the initial origins of it. So, talking about sort of modern day 911 issues. So we already talked about the fact that, especially with the technology hindrances of the day, it took a really long time for all places to kind of have the coverage that we have now. However, looking into, early 21st century and even now still, the 911 system and the way dispatchers and operators work, the entire system was created around landlines. At this point, cell phones really were not even in existence, or, so new that nobody really had them. So the big concern with that is that, location, whenever you call 911 from a landline, they receive that information instantaneously. They know exactly the address of where you're coming from. Now, however, it's a matter of them being able to track down the closest cell phone tower. So this really isn't a big deal if you're calling, 911 from your house or something like that, where you know the exact address of your exact location. However, even today, people call 911 from public places where they really don't know what the address is. People call it from the roadside of the highway where, they don't know what interstate they're on, if they're eastbound, westbound, things like that. So the challenge is, way more prevalent than you might consider, and again, it can be really challenging. Dispatch is great at, trying to ask really informative questions of, do you see any landmarks, what's your closest exit number, things like that, but if they're not able to hero in on that information, it can take them a really long time to try and pinpoint someone's location. So there really is an emphasis on getting accurate location of the person calling as soon as possible. So Savannah, you made a comment that whenever you call 911, they ask you, where are you? What's your address? Things like that. So especially today, that is like a very top priority. Whenever you call 911, that is one of those first 3 questions they're going to ask you is, where are you? What's your current location? Because again, it's going to be super problematic if they know everything about your emergency, but they have no idea where to send resources to help you. And I just found this one quote that I thought was really interesting. It says, in 2015, USA Today published a report that found most 911 systems throughout the U.S. had dismal location detection capabilities when cell phones were used. And then there was a quote, in an era where your mobile phone can tell Facebook, Uber, or even video games where you're located, with amazing accuracy, 911 operators are often left in the dark. So I thought that was like a really powerful quote, especially because we think about the dozens of apps on our phone that all have, we hit the consent button, like I, allow you to track my every move, and, they can tell you the exact street corner where you're standing, again, from Facebook to Uber to, Pokemon Go and Snapchat. Like, they all know right where we are. So really the problem lies in the fact that, when these systems were created for 911, again, they were created around landlines, and unfortunately the 911 operator technology has not really grown with the rest of the technologies. So, it's very expensive. It's not something that receives an excessive amount of funding for them to be able to update technologies regularly. So again, it is pretty crazy to think about that while, we might have 20 apps on our phone that can tell, any internet server ever our exact location, 911 operator systems, they just haven't maintained at the exact same speed. So I have a little video of a little bit of a satirical news report that's going to talk about that same problem of just difficulty locating. So this is John Oliver, really fun take on the news if you guys don't watch him often. We'll see what he has to say.
We make roughly 240 million 911 calls each year, and the dispatchers do amazing work talking people through childbirth, CPR, abductions, and home break-ins. In fact, we're so accustomed to relying on them, we even call when we don't have an emergency.
911, where's your emergency? I'm sorry, but the server's still on. I'm sorry, you cannot call 911 for that. You're welcome.
I think I'm having an overdose with my wife. We came out, and I think we're dead. I'm going back to the room.
I am so calling because I have a baby living in my house. It's crawling in my printer. The baby crawling in your printer? No, a baby lizard. Oh, a lizard.
Where is your emergency?
I'm on the door.
That's Richie.
I'm done.
You're done. Oh, you're done, Bonnie? Okay.
Okay, now I know that sounds adorable, but that kid may have caused such a mess in that bathroom, he had to call 911. Oh yeah, this is Richie. You guys have some sort of emergency clean-up crew you can send out? Because I am done going potty. We have a lot of faith in 911. The system can break down more than you think, and when it does, people can die as a result.
Chanel Anderson was delivering newspapers in the dark in suburban Atlanta when she careened into this pond. She knew right where she was. But 911 dispatchers can't find her on their map. It took first responders nearly 20 minutes to get to her.
She died because a system we expect to save our lives failed her. And 911 losing valuable time simply because dispatchers have trouble determining your location isn't.
Alrighty, so very unfortunate story of, again, a real 911 call where someone called, she was having, medical emergency, and unfortunately, like he said, this woman ended up drowning because 911 was unable to find her location. So again, this problem is still very real, very prevalent. I actually had this happen to me for probably like the first time on my very last shift the other day. We received an address, and it was out in the White Cross area, which, if any of you are familiar with, is a lot more rural than a lot of areas of Orange County. And we received a physical address of a street name, and our GPS system, we use Apple Maps and Google Maps, neither of which had ever, they didn't have the street name within their system. So we're looking, and my partner, he even pulled out the hard copy of the Orange County map, which we hardly ever resort to our physical copies of our map books, but he pulled it out and he said, it's not on here. So thankfully, this was a call where the fire department was responding, and as with many, especially smaller and local fire departments, they're very up to par on their map studies of their districts, just because they are responsible for a very small but specific area. So they were able to give us really detailed instructions of this is where the road is. But again, this just goes to show, dispatch was able to tell us a cross street at least, but none of our other technologies recognize this road. So location is still a problem for us even today. And again, these people knew where their location was. They gave us a street address, but with the technology that we had, and scarily enough what Google has, was not able to help us. So, we still have limitations. It's still far from a perfect system. So, talking about, who are the dispatchers themselves? What does, their job and their process kind of look like? So in the early days of 911 dispatch, which again, thinking back, that's just kind of back to the early 70s, dispatchers functioned a lot more like general telephone operators than, first responders. So they were typically lay people. They didn't have any type of training in medicine or first aid or first response, anything like that. So there was a really fantastic incident where it was in the year 1976. I think it was in Arizona, where a man who was a paramedic and had paramedic level training, his name was Bill Toon, he happened to just be, working in dispatch that day, like it was just a job that he did on the side. Again, he had no formal dispatch training, but he himself was a paramedic. So a woman called 911 for her baby that wasn't breathing. So this man was able to give her, very specific medical instructions and, first aid directions and things like that for her to, try and help her baby before additional resources could arrive. And this baby actually ended up surviving. And so people saw this moment, and I think the light bulb went off, and they said, wow, this is really fantastic. If we had trained personnel that had specific instructions on how to, help people before our physical help arrives, that could really make a big difference. And again, this incident in 1976, this was considered the first recognized pre-arrival instructions in emergency medical dispatch for a dispatcher to give someone who's calling 911. So again, they realized, a little bit of training and, some specific directions and instructions could go a long way. So there was another man, Dr. Jeff Clausen. At the time, he was the medical director in Salt Lake City, Utah. In the year 1977, he created specific dispatch protocols to be used in the city, and this approach became known as Medical Priority Dispatching System. So what it allowed for was, based on the information of what the caller was giving you, you would go down a pathway of, if they said a person's not breathing, here's what you need to instruct them to do next. If they say they're having chest pain, then they would direct the caller to go ahead and do this. All in the meanwhile, still, sending responders on the way. So, it certainly requires a lot of multitasking. And then not long after that, in the early 80s, again, a little boost in technology. With the introduction of computers, it allowed for even more complex algorithms to be used for questions to ask the caller and then also instructions to give them. But still, even while they're making all of these advancements and, trying to implement protocols in these places, there were definitely some critical mistakes that revealed the need to really train dispatchers very diligently, and also to create these thorough questions and instructions for them to use to determine the severity of the emergency, and also proper pre-arrival instructions for the person calling. So there were two instances out of many that I read. One was in 1984 and another was in 1986. And it was a person that had called 911 for, what they thought was hyperventilating. She said, I'm breathing really fast, and I think the dispatcher, really took it as kind of, a very basic level, maybe anxiety attack or just hyperventilating, when she was in fact having a heart attack. And so, this person, the dispatcher basically advised them, you should be okay to drive yourself, and she actually, heart attack progressed and went into cardiac arrest in her car and died. So, there was another instance of a very similar story. It was actually, back in the day, one of the dispatch protocols that dispatch could use was we do not recommend us sending you resources. Basically your call sounds like it's nothing, and we're not going to send anybody. And it was a man who was calling an ambulance for his mom, and he said, I think she's sick. And they said, it really doesn't sound like she's sick. Y'all should be fine to go to the doctor. And again, she ended up dying. So that was definitely one of the instances that removed we're not going to send you a unit protocol from the 911 system. That doesn't happen anymore. So again, really key things that we want our dispatchers to be able to recognize are, anything that sounds like it could possibly be a stroke, heart attack, cardiac arrest, things like that. We really want them to pick up on those, signs and symptoms so that they can deliver those proper instructions to the caller. But they're also giving informations to incoming responders. So another, key piece of information that dispatch gives us is basically a response determinant that's ranging somewhere from alpha to echo. So I know you guys have heard us talk about these in class before, but Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, things like that. Alpha being sort of the least serious call that we're going to be considering, it does not sound emergent in any nature. And then sort of as you go down the chain, particularly to Delta and Echo, dispatch is recognizing this as a potential immediate life threat. And, this is going to be what's determining us as responders whether we're responding emergency or non-emergency traffic. So whether or not we're going to go lights and sirens to this call or not go lights and sirens. And this was something that dispatch really wanted to prioritize for the safety of responders as a whole. So what they found, because we're trying to consider positive patient outcomes, but also keeping providers safe, while going emergency traffic can be useful and it can help, fasten our response times by a couple of minutes here and there, they also found that, responders are significantly more likely to be in an accident when we're going emergency traffic to calls versus when we're going routine traffic. So again, they wanted to be able to take all of this information from the caller and say, based on this, we advise you should go emergency traffic or non-emergency. So that's another piece of info that dispatch was able to give us. And then by sort of the 90s, this whole process and dispatching as a whole had come along far enough that they really saw a need for the standardizing of training. It's not just every system kind of gets to decide, oh yeah, read this book and you're fine, or, do this and you're qualified. They really wanted to sort of standardize the process so that dispatchers everywhere are kind of using the same systems, operating under a similar, medical dispatching protocols and things of that nature. So really not up until the 90s that this process was really as regulated and as standardized as it is today. So really quickly, we are going to do a quick kind of group activity. So I know you guys kind of have your groups that you're sort of sitting with now. If you're not sitting next to someone, you can just like turn your chair around and talk with them really quickly. So what we're doing is basically putting you guys in the shoes of dispatchers. So got a little scenario for you. So you, an EMS dispatcher, take a call from a 19-year-old female who is on the other end of the line crying profusely. She states that she came home and found her boyfriend passed out on the floor and that he's not moving. After determining her location, I want you to try and come up with maybe 5 questions that you're going to want to ask the caller about the patient. Again, think about things that, would be useful for information that you could tell her to do, maybe that could help her boyfriend until responders arrive, but also important information for you to be able to tell the responders. So just kind of think of 5 questions that you would want to know. So you got her location and she's there with her boyfriend and she says he's passed out and he's not moving. So 5 questions, and then based on her answers, especially if they're yes or no questions, try and think of, what are some possible instructions that you would want to give her. So if you guys want to maybe just take like 2 minutes, it's going to be super informal, talk it out with your group. So based on this information, what are some questions that you want to ask her, and what are any instructions that you think that you would like to consider giving her?
Are they breathing?
Right, so those are questions we're asking. What if they're not breathing?
Are they changing color?
What if they're just, what if he's or she's just unconscious, but he's breathing?
Alrighty, so hopefully everyone's had just a second to maybe think of some questions. So based on what you know, she says she came into the room, she found her boyfriend laying on the floor and he's not moving. So group 1 over here, what's one question that you would like to ask her next?
Does he have a pulse?
Does he have a pulse? Very good. So what if she says, how do I check for a pulse?
We would instruct her on how to check her pulse.
Okay, and then what if she says, no, he doesn't have a pulse? Okay, awesome. So that's, again, a true life-saving pre-arrival instruction for you to be able to give this young lady, you know, for her to be able to recognize, you know, probable cardiac arrest and to be able to instruct